There comes a moment in your life when you realize that being available to everyone has been costing you something you can't get back, your peace. Maybe you've answered every call, forgiven every disappointment, explained yourself to people who had already decided to misunderstand you, and kept showing up for those who only remembered you when they needed something. You called it kindness. You called it love. You called it being a good person. But somewhere along the way, you started wondering why giving so much never seemed to make you feel more valued. Listen carefully. Your worth does not increase because you become harder to reach. Your worth becomes visible when you stop treating your time, attention, energy, and heart as things anyone can claim without consideration. Welcome back to Focus with Maya. Today we're talking about something deeper than simply being hard to get. We're talking about self-respect. We're talking about boundaries. We're talking about the quiet transformation that happens when you stop trying to convince people of your value and start living as though you already know it. Because there is a difference between being loved and being used. There is a difference between being generous and being constantly available. And there is a difference between having a kind heart and abandoning yourself just to keep somebody else comfortable. Maybe you've been taught that saying no makes you selfish. Maybe you've been made to feel guilty for needing space. Maybe someone only appreciated you when you were useful to them. If so, this message is going to touch something very real. Because becoming expensive isn't about demanding more from other people. It's about no longer accepting less from yourself. And before this conversation ends, you may see your relationships, your time, and even your own identity differently. Sometimes the hardest person to say no to is not another person. It's the version of yourself that is terrified of being rejected. Think about how often you've agreed to something while your heart was quietly saying, "I don't want to do this." You answered the message when you needed rest. You accepted the invitation when you wanted to be alone. You gave another explanation to someone who had already shown you they weren't listening. And afterward, you felt strangely empty. Not because you had done something generous. Because somewhere inside you knew you had abandoned yourself to keep someone else. That is where the real problem begins. When you're constantly available, people can begin to mistake access for entitlement. They stop appreciating your presence because your presence has become guaranteed. They don't have to consider your time because you keep giving it away without asking them to respect it. Human beings often learn the value of something through limitation. Not because scarcity automatically makes something better, but because boundaries force people to recognize that access is not ownership. Your attention is not a public resource. Your emotional energy is not an emergency service. Your life is not a waiting room where everyone else gets called before you. And please understand this. Becoming less available does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming intentional. There will be people who notice the change and ask, "What happened to you?" Maybe nothing happened. Maybe you simply stopped disappearing from your own life. Maybe you finally realize that every hour you spend trying to satisfy everyone is an hour you cannot spend becoming the person you were meant to become. That realization can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've built your identity around being needed. But being needed is not the same as being valued. And once you understand that difference, you begin making choices from self-respect instead of fear. You stop asking, "Will they still like me if I say no?" And you begin asking something much more important. "Will I still respect myself if I keep saying yes?" There is another reason people struggle to become less accessible. They confuse attention with connection. When someone constantly calls you, messages you, asks for your opinion, or tells you their problems, it can feel like proof that you matter. You feel important because somebody needs you. And when that attention disappears, a quiet fear can rise inside you. What if they don't need me anymore? That question has trapped many good people in relationships that were never truly nourishing. Because sometimes we aren't holding on to a person. We're holding on to the feeling of being wanted. And those are not the same thing. Real connection doesn't require you to perform for your place in someone's life. You don't have to be endlessly available to prove that you care. You don't have to respond immediately to every crisis. You don't have to solve every problem. You don't have to make yourself emotionally exhausted just so another person can feel comfortable. Healthy relationships have room for two people to exist. There is room for your silence. There is room for your priorities. There is room for you to have a difficult day without apologizing for it. Think about the person who always says, "I'm fine," even when they're falling apart. They smile because they don't want to burden anyone. They listen because they don't know how to ask someone to listen to them. They keep giving because receiving makes them uncomfortable. Eventually, they become exhausted and wonder why nobody noticed. But sometimes people don't notice because you've spent years teaching them that you're okay. That doesn't make you responsible for their failure to care. It simply reveals why honest boundaries matter. You have to let people encounter the real shape of your life. Sometimes that means saying, "I can't do that today." Sometimes it means leaving a message unanswered until you have the energy to respond. Sometimes it means choosing rest without explaining yourself. And yes, some people may become disappointed. Let them. Disappointment is not always evidence that you've done something wrong. Sometimes it's simply evidence that someone expected access you were never obligated to give. If you're learning to choose yourself without becoming cruel, write one word in the comments that describes what you need more of in your life right now. There is a quiet kind of confidence that appears when you stop explaining every decision you make. You don't announce every boundary. You don't defend every choice. You don't turn your private life into a courtroom where everyone gets to cross-examine you. You simply begin to live differently. And at first, that can feel strange. If you've spent years explaining yourself, silence may feel like guilt. If you've spent years seeking approval, independence may feel like rejection. If you've spent years asking people to understand you, accepting that some people never will can feel painful. But maturity teaches you something important. Understanding is not always required for you to move forward. Someone can misunderstand your decision and you can still make it. Someone can disagree with your boundary and you can still keep it. Someone can call you distant because you stopped allowing them to disturb your peace. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. Think about how much energy is lost trying to prove that your intentions were good. You send the long message. You explain what happened. You describe what you meant. You remind them of everything you've done for them. And still they find a way to make you the problem. At some point, you have to recognize when explanation has stopped being communication and started becoming begging. Begging to be understood. Begging to be accepted. Begging someone to see the heart behind your actions. But your dignity cannot depend on another person's interpretation of you. There will be people who only recognize your value after your absence creates a space they can no longer ignore. Don't make your absence a performance. Don't disappear just to make someone chase you. Instead, build a life so rooted in your own values that whether someone notices your absence or not, you remain steady. That's what it means to become expensive. Your presence carries weight because you don't scatter it everywhere. Your attention means something because you give it consciously. Your yes means something because your no exists. And your kindness becomes stronger, not weaker, when it is guided by wisdom. The goal isn't to make people afraid of losing you. The goal is to become so faithful to yourself that you are no longer afraid of losing people who require you to betray yourself in order to keep them. There is a difference between being generous and being available for exploitation. That difference is often invisible in the beginning. You help someone because you care. You stay late because they need you. You lend your time, your money, your attention, your patience. You forgive a little too quickly because you remember their good side. You give them another chance because you believe people can change, and there is beauty in having that kind of heart. But even a beautiful heart needs a door. Otherwise, everyone walks in carrying whatever they want to leave behind. Some people don't recognize generosity until it stops. They become accustomed to your sacrifice. Your patience becomes expected. Your forgiveness becomes guaranteed. Your willingness to help becomes part of their plan. And when you finally say no, they don't ask what happened to you. They ask why you've changed. That question can hurt because you may start wondering whether you've actually become selfish. But listen closely. Sometimes people call you selfish because your new boundaries interfere with their old privileges. That doesn't mean you are selfish. It means the relationship is being forced to become more honest. There is a moment when you have to stop giving from an empty place. You can't Keep pouring from yourself while secretly hoping someone will notice how tired you are and finally pour something back. That's not sustainable love. That's emotional exhaustion disguised as devotion. Real generosity has freedom in it. You give because you choose to give, not because you're terrified of what will happen if you don't. And that distinction changes everything. Imagine waking up one morning and deciding that you won't automatically rescue everyone from the consequences of their own choices. You can care without fixing. You can listen without carrying. You can love someone without becoming responsible for their happiness. You can wish someone well and still walk away from what harms you. That isn't cruelty. That's emotional adulthood. The people who genuinely care about you may need time to adjust, but they will eventually understand that your boundaries are not punishments. They're instructions for how to love you without losing you. And the people who only valued what you provided may become angry when the supply disappears. Let them reveal themselves. You don't need to fight every revelation. Sometimes the truth becomes clearest when you stop doing the thing that allowed someone to hide it. One of the most difficult lessons in becoming harder to access is learning to tolerate being misunderstood. Because when you change, not everyone will understand the change. The person who was used to your immediate replies may think you're ignoring them. The person who depended on your constant reassurance may say you've become distant. The person who benefited from your inability to say no may suddenly describe you as selfish, and if you're not careful, you'll run back to your old behavior just to restore the peace. But ask yourself this: is it really peace if you have to abandon yourself to create it? Sometimes what we call peace is simply the absence of conflict because we've agreed to suffer silently. You don't need that kind of peace anymore. You need the kind that allows you to sleep at night, knowing you didn't betray your own needs just to keep someone else pleased. This is where emotional strength becomes practical. You begin pausing before you answer. Someone asks you for something, and instead of automatically saying yes, you say, "Let me think about it." Those few words can change your life. They create space between the request and your response. Inside that space, you can hear yourself. Do I actually want to do this? Do I have the energy? Am I helping because I genuinely want to, or because I'm afraid they'll be disappointed? Would I still say yes if I knew they might never return the favor? That last question can expose a great deal. Because sometimes we aren't giving freely, we're investing emotionally and secretly waiting for a return. And when it doesn't come, resentment begins. Healthy boundaries prevent that resentment from growing. They allow you to give what you can give without secretly demanding that someone repay you with gratitude, loyalty, attention, or love. You become clearer. You stop making promises you don't have the capacity to keep. You stop answering every problem with your own sacrifice. And slowly something beautiful happens. Your relationships begin sorting themselves. Some become deeper because honesty replaces performance. Some become quieter because there was never much connection beneath the convenience. And some disappear. That can hurt. But not every loss is a tragedy. Sometimes losing access to you is exactly what allows you to regain access to yourself. And that may be one of the most valuable things you ever learn. There comes a point when self-respect stops being something you talk about and becomes something you practice in ordinary moments. It happens when you don't call someone back while you're angry, just because you're afraid they'll leave. It happens when you walk away from a conversation that has become disrespectful instead of staying there to prove your worth. It happens when you stop checking your phone every few minutes, waiting for someone who has repeatedly shown you that your attention matters more to you than theirs does. These moments may look small from the outside, but they are not small. They are votes for the person you're becoming. Every time you honor your own boundary, you teach yourself that your feelings deserve consideration. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you rebuild a little trust with the person you've been living with your entire life, you. And that relationship matters. Because you can have people around you and still feel abandoned if you've abandoned yourself. You can be surrounded by affection and still feel empty if you keep accepting relationships that require you to shrink. You can receive compliments and still feel insecure if your sense of worth depends on whether someone chooses you. The goal isn't to become so independent that you need nobody. That's not strength. Humans need connection. We need friendship, affection, community, tenderness. We need people who can sit beside us when life becomes heavy. The goal is different. You want connection without desperation, love without self-erasure, compassion without surrendering your identity. You want to be able to say, I love you, without meaning, I will tolerate anything from you. That distinction can save years of your life. And perhaps you've been waiting for someone else to finally recognize your value.